Ahoy there, Captain Benzie here, coming at you with another episode of the Frigate Pilot's Manifesto, the series that aims to teach you everything you'll need to know to become a dedicated frigate pilot in EVE Echoes. Today we're taking our first look at the Tech 8 interceptors, starting off with the Condor Interceptor, which was by far the most popular choice when I put up a poll on the YouTube channel asking which one you guys would like me to cover first. Doesn't at all surprise me. The Condor 2 is an incredibly popular ship, arguably one of the most popular ships in EVE Echoes, so it comes as no surprise to me that the Condor Interceptor would be the one you guys want to see covered first. So that's exactly what we're going to do in today's video. We're going to have a look at what it means to be a Tech 8 interceptor. We're going to have a look at the stats and attributes of this particular ship in specific, the Condor Interceptor. We'll have a look at how this ship works, how to fit it, and a couple of examples of actually using it out in the field, so to speak. Now, because the Condor 2 is such a popular ship as well, we are going to look at a comparison between the Condor 2 and the Condor Interceptor, because there are situations where you may still want to use the Condor 2, and other situations where the Condor Interceptor clearly takes the lead. Now, if you do enjoy this video, or if you find it useful, let me know by hitting like on it. Subscribe to the channel for all things EVE Echoes, ding that notification bell so that you never miss an upload, and let me know in the comment section down below what ships and what topics you want me to cover in future videos. If you want to come and join the Catskull cartel, let me know. Come join us on Discord. Details are in the silver bar down below, but due to the uppercase, lowercase nature of the font I've used there, do use the link that's in the description instead. Come join the Catskull cartel. We are still recruiting. You just need to join our Discord first. Finally, if you do want to go the extra mile to help support this channel, you can do so by joining us on Patreon. Details on screen now. That said and done then, let's talk about the Condor Interceptor. Each of the four main empires, of course, has their own different variant of the Tech 8 interceptor frigates, the H1 Interceptor, the Executioner, and the Slasher Interceptor, of course, being the others. Now, of course, the Condor Interceptor is found on the Caldari State tracks, since the Tech 2 frigate was the Condor, Tech 4 Interceptor here was the Condor 2, and then up at Tech level 8, of course, we find the Condor Interceptor. Awesome looking frigate. I do really like how this one looks, that sort of slate grey and gunmetal with the red detailing. Interesting bit of information that I picked up from reading the Frigates of EVE Online book that I picked up recently. The cockpit at the front of this thing looks like that's where the pilot would sit, or where the capsule would go. It's actually not the case with the Condor. Even when it's unpiloted, it all goes up in the hump on the back of the frigate there. The bit that looks like a cockpit is actually just a sensor array, believe it or not. Anyway, interesting bit of trivia I thought you might enjoy as much as I did. Now, at this point, I would normally jump into attributes and fittings to talk about what makes this ship special. However, I am going to start off this time by having a look at what makes an interceptor an interceptor. Now, first and foremost is that absolutely delicious roll bonus, +1 warp disrupt field immunity level. This, you can rejoice, means that this ship is immune to all forms of warp disruption fields, whether that is an interdictor sphere that has been launched from something like a Thrasher interdictor or a Coercer interdictor, or whether that is a warp disruption field being emitted by something like a Rupture interdictor or one of the heavy cruisers, that kind of thing. Ultimately, as well, one of the points I wasn't certain on, but I have tested, is that yes, this is complete immunity. It's not just one of these fields that it's immune to, it is all of them. You can stack as many different interdictor bubbles on each other as you like, different types, different kinds from different ships, and they will be ignored by an interceptor. You can achieve warp and jump out of them whilst you are still inside them, and if you're jumping towards a gate that has interdictor spheres on it, you will not stop on the edge, you will jump right the way to the warp point. You clear the interdictor sphere. Interceptors ignore all forms of interdiction sphere, which is amazing. Now, the second thing to note about interceptors is they all get a bonus to Advanced Electronic Warfare and Advanced Frigate Command. Now, like with the other Tech 4 tackle frigates, like the Condor 2, the Atron 2, etc., the Frigate Command skill gives you bonuses to your weapon system, and is different from each of the different types of interceptor, whether it's the Condor or the Slasher, etc. But the Advanced Electronic Warfare bonus is the same across the board for all four. And what you get for each level in Advanced Electronic Warfare, you get a a bonus of 3% warp disruptor optimal range, 3% warp scrambler optimal range, and a 15% reduction to warp drive signature radius penalty. At full level 5 of advanced electronic warfare, that is of course 15% additional range to the warp disruptor and the warp scrambler, and a 75% reduction to the micro warp drive signature radius penalty. That is a key point in regards to the interceptors. Whereas the tier 4 tackle frigates were using afterburners and getting bonuses to those, the interceptors get bonuses to micro warp drives. And it is important to remember that micro warp drives are switched off by scramblers. That's a key point that we're going to discuss later when it comes to fitting an interceptor, because essentially, if you were in one of the tier 4 tackle frigates and you got hit with a web, it would slow you down. Here, if you get hit with a scrambler, it pretty much shuts you off. You're not just slowed down, it's not a 50% reduction to your speed, it takes you all the way from about 4,000 meters per second all the way down to about 400 meters per second. It's a humongous difference, and it will get you killed. That's why the warp scrambler optimal range there is actually a key component of what makes an interceptor, because it gives you that ability to actually orbit outside of their scram range whilst maintaining your own. So if you're using high power warp scramblers, remember yours are ever so slightly longer range than theirs. So if you can set up a ship to be outside of their scram range whilst you hold them in yours, well, that's a really key point of using the interceptors. Now, in the case here of the Condor Interceptor, Advanced Frigate Command gives a bonus of 10% increase to small missile torpedo damage. Yes, that's a 50% increase to small missile torpedo damage if you have Advanced Frigate Command trained up to level 5, and by the time you're at Tech 8, you really should. And I know a lot of you have been saying, why on earth would anyone use a Condor Interceptor? Small missiles got such a nerf in the last patch. No, they didn't. They just got brought back down to the same sort of level as every other weapon system out there. When I did the Condor 2 video, I kind of did the Condor 2 one before doing the Atron 2, the Executioner 2, or the Slasher 2, simply because there wasn't much point using the others. The Condor 2 was just the best of the bunch by quite a distance. Now they are pretty much equal to each other, which is a really nice thing to see. So looking at the Condor Interceptor in specific then, let's have a look at its attributes and fittings. Now it has the same fitting profile as a faction frigate, which is to say 3 high slots, 3 mid slots, 3 low slots, 3 power grid rigs, and 3 mechanical rigs. Interestingly enough though, the Condor Interceptor has a power grid output of only 39 megawatts. As an aside, the Atron has 55 and the Executioner has 62. The Slasher also only has 39, and it does cause us some problems in fitting, which we'll come to in a brief moment. Defensively speaking as well, the Condor Interceptor is the lowest of the bunch with only 2,106. It's not the most tanky, but it definitely has the biggest shield at 758. Just sadly, there's not much in the way of armor or structure beyond that. And in fairness, that's not particularly much in the way of defense anyway. If you do start taking some heavy damage, you're going to have a bad time, which is why this is clearly a speed tank. As we go down a little bit lower, you'll see you've got a signature radius of 28.9 meters, and you've got a flight velocity of 424. Now, looking at the little chart that I've put together on this, that makes the Condor Interceptor the slowest of the 4 interceptors, and the largest in terms of its signature radius. Now, that doesn't mean that it can't speed tank. It definitely doesn't mean that it can't speed tank, but it means that you just need to take that into consideration when you're going up against certain targets. You will take slightly more damage than some of the other speed tanking interceptors might do otherwise, but the payoff for that is the fact that you are of course using missile systems which give you a lot better range control. Obviously, if you're using something like railguns or lasers or cannons, then your effectiveness kind of dwindles the further out you go, whereas with the missiles, you're able to hit as effectively whether you're at their maximum range or if you're at 0 kilometers. Ultimately, everything else staying the same, your effectiveness does not change with range when you're using missiles, which is a very useful point with the Condor. Looking at the rest of its stats here briefly, 5.5 AU per second warp speed is the same across the board for all of them. It's got a fairly decent mass with a slow inertia modifier. Again, these are fairly similar between the individual ships. There is some variance between the interceptors, but it doesn't make that much of a difference overall. Scan resolution of 820 is pretty large. Again, that doesn't actually put it at the top of the list, but it is still pretty good. It's going to lock on very, very quickly to other things. So, all that said and done, that's what the Condor Interceptor is. Let's have a look at how I would suggest that you fit this thing. I seem to do this a lot when recording. I say, right, let's go and have a look at fitting it. And I'm like, actually, no, we're not just yet. We need to stop and have a look at the skills first. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to have a look at the relevant skills that this ship is benefiting from so that you can understand how I'm able to pull off what I'm doing and where those skill bonuses are all coming from. Plus, it gives you kind of an idea of what you should be training in order to be flying ships like this. Now, of course, the first thing, Frigate Command. You've heard me say it so many times on this channel. Frigate Command to 5, and then by time you're getting ships that are using Advanced Frigate Command, rush that to 5 too. Doesn't matter that I've got Expert Frigate Command up at 4 here, all that's doing is giving me a little bit of extra inertia modifier and a little bit of extra frigate velocity. The most important part though is getting that Advanced Frigate Command up to 5 so that you're getting the full bonuses to the Advanced Frigate Command skill. In the case here of the Condor Interceptor, that is of course that additional damage to your missiles and torpedoes. Getting that up, very, very useful, especially since that additional, the additional 10% reduction to inertia modifier and increase to flight velocity are both very useful. Secondarily, micro warp drive operation is going to be a useful skill for you to have as well. It's not one of the ones that's listed as the ship's skill bonuses, but obviously, if micro warp drives is something this ship is going to be using, you want to be as effective as possible when using them. You'll see that I've taken advanced micro warp drive all the way to 5, and that's because some ships that I was using do get bonuses to those, namely the assault frigates. But essentially that gives a 15% reduction to the capacitor required to activate a micro warp drive, whilst also increasing the activation time for that. Now, the way I like to give this as an example is kind of imagine that instead of paying rent of £100 once every 4 weeks, and God, I wish rent was only £100, imagine rather than paying rent £100 every 4 weeks, you are only paying £85 every 5 weeks. That's kind of what you're doing here by leveling into micro warp drive operation. Now, I will go back and get micro warp drive operation to 5. I got advanced micro warp drive operation to 5 because ships had benefits from it. I then went into expert micro warp drive operation to 3. That's basically because you can see the 3 skill points there gave me a 9% reduction and an 8% increase to activation time, whereas a similar amount here to the warp drive to the micro warp drive operation basic skill would only give me a 4% increase to capacitor need, 4% reduction to capacitor need, and a 5% increase to activation time. Those were the things that I cared about most, and it was just a better skill point investment at that time. Now that I've got expert micro warp drive operation to 3, I will go back to the basic and get that to 5. Shield operation has its uses, certainly. We are going to fit shield boosters onto this particular ship. It is a shield tank ship, so if you do want to be able to repair some damage, then shield operation is going to be a useful one. Frigate defense, obviously. Frigate defense, again, is one of those skills that just helps out on every ship you have. For starters, it gives a flat 50% HP to shield, armor, and structure, always a nice benefit. And then at advanced, it's an additional 25% across the board, which just makes you that little bit more survivable. And you'll see my stats do differ a little bit from the basic ship fitting stats we saw a second ago. Importantly though, under electronics, we have under electronic systems, advanced electronic warfare. Now, this skill got a change in the recent patch in that not only does it affect stasis weapon fire and warp disruptors by reducing their capacitor requirements, it also increases Nosferatu, optimal range, and accuracy fall off at basic, and once we train it into advanced, that then also gives bonuses to energy neutralizers. Not hugely important to this build, but just a nice thing to note because I know a lot of people missed that when the patch came. The reason I've taken advanced electronic warfare all the way to 5, other than the fact that I fly a crew war quite a bit, is because obviously these interceptors benefit from that directly. Very useful skill there to have, especially if you're flying interceptors, as it reduces that signature radius penalty from your micro warp drive, and that is a key part of flying these interceptors. Don't bother trying to fly one of these interceptors without having advanced electronic warfare all the way to 5, because if you don't have it to 5, there's no point using a micro warp drive because you're not getting the benefits and you're not going to be small enough to avoid incoming fire, which means you're going to need to use an afterburner. And if you're going to put an afterburner on a ship like this, you may as well be just using the Condor 2 because it gets the bonuses to it and stays an awful lot cheaper. Now, because of fittings, etc., I am training into Expert Frigate Engineering 5. You can see there Frigate Engineering 5, Advanced Frigate Engineering 5, and Expert Frigate Engineering 4, working towards 5. Now, what these do is they increase the amount of capacity that the ship has, increases the amount of power grid, and reduces the amount of warp capacity needed to in order to escape and warp away. The most important part there is that power grid increase, because as we've said, the Condor Interceptor does have a very low power grid of 39. In fact, that 39 megawatt power grid is insufficient to comfortably fit 3 times Pithy C small missile launchers, even at Frigate Engineering 554. You do have to sort of make some sacrifices and work around with that, and that's kind of a key point. Finally then, looking at missiles, because they're relevant to this ship, personally, I only have small missile torpedo operation at 4 and 4, and small missile torpedo upgrade at 4 and 4 as well. These are literally the last weapon skills I'm training into. I personally prefer my turrets, but you'll see that still applies a good amount of DPS here on the Condor Interceptor. Now, a big thank you and a shout out to Yatsuki for supplying not only the Condor Interceptor, but also the Atron, Executioner and Slasher Interceptors for those other upcoming videos when they arrive. Now, with the skills that you've just seen and with the fitting that I'm showcasing here on screen, you'll see currently my offensive DPS is sitting at 212.73. That's post-patch, obviously. We've had the nerfs to missiles. They are still a very solid weapon system, and that's using missile launchers, not torpedoes. Defensively speaking, we're about 2,899 thanks to Frigate Defense Upgrade, most of which, as you can see, is very much in the shield there. Still a decent amount on armour and structure, but very much mostly in the shields. And then looking at the targeting side of things, obviously very small signature radius, 4 max targets, good scan resolution there, 943, thanks to me having target scanning leveled up a little bit. And you'll see that Frigate Command has taken our basic flight velocity to 665.68, and I will talk about that more later on when we undock this and actually showcase how the micro warp drive changes things. Now, interesting point just to bring up here is the warp preparation time, 1.13 seconds. What this means is between activating warp and sort of getting to warp will take, usually in ideal situations, 1.13 seconds. Now, a lot of people like to spout out this magical number of 2 seconds. If you warp faster than 2 seconds, you cannot be caught. That's not strictly true. There are some ships that can actually catch you even as fast as like 1.1 seconds. This can still be caught, but it is very, very difficult to do so. I wouldn't recommend going back to AFK autopiloting through Null, but in fairness, I've done it several times and have gotten away with it each time so far, despite there being numerous gate camps, bubble gate camps, in the area of Nullsec where I'm currently residing. Anyway, enough about all that, let's actually have a look at how I fitted this. So in this case, I've got 3 Discipline small missile launchers. Now, I've mentioned there previously that for some reason the Pithy C small missile launchers don't quite fit. You can see the power grid here is pretty much full. I'm sitting there at 55 out of 57. If I were to open up here and scroll down to the Pithy C types, you'll see that they do have, when we get down past all of my stockpiled weapons, Pithy C types here, they have a power grid requirement of 8 megawatts, whereas these here, the Discipline, only have a power grid requirement of 6.58. That obviously is a lot easier. The 6.58, if you round that up to 7, it's 1 megawatt difference, but obviously I've only got 2 megawatts spare on this fit, and that's with me at Frigate Engineering 554. If you're not at 554, you're going to struggle to get that on there without some power grid, without some extra power grid, either by, by rigging for it or for however you choose to do that. So for me, I've just stopped at Discipline small missile launchers. I wasn't really willing to go out there and start slapping on heavy power grid rigs like ancillary power grid routers, that kind of thing, but you can do if you absolutely need to upgrade those extra few DPS. To me, it's not really worth it. The Discipline's good enough. For the low slots, a Gisty C-type small micro warp drive is the best that money can buy right now. That gives us a 539% increase to flight velocity, whilst only giving us a 103% increase to signature radius. Do you see the benefit here now? Ultimately, I'm getting a 540%, call it, 540% increase to the speed of my ship, whilst only increasing the signature radius by 100. If you've watched my video on how turrets work, you'll have seen that that wonderful formula that explains how tracking works in regards to signature radius and velocity. So you're increasing one side by over 5 times, whilst only barely doubling the basic one. By only doubling the penalty. It's a huge increase. The second part I've gone for down here is a veteran small shield booster. Again, just because it was all I could really cram in. I do have Gisty C sitting around, but they don't quite fit thanks to the power grid requirements. I do need to train up my shield skills, and I can probably cram one of those in. But in fairness, again, we're not really taking much in the way of damage, so your shield booster isn't vital. It's not a huge part of things here. And being a mecha level 8, it's still pretty good. You know, there's not much need to upgrade. Go to all that extra fuss just to get a tiny little increase out of going up to dead space level. For the middle then of the low slots, a full duplex ballistic control system. I still don't have any meta level 8 ones of these. That just gives a nice little bonus there, 5% damage bonus and a 4.01% increase to decrease to activation time when it's cold. You then get that additional 8.03 damage bonus when it's activated, and your activation time adjustment is boosted by 400%, so you fire faster and you deal more damage. That massively increases the DPS when it's active. Nice little bit there. Now for the mid slots, again, this is an unusual situation and different people will have different ideas here. So don't shoot me down, don't tell me, oh, you're wrong, you've got a terrible fit. This works for me, it's doing everything that I want it to. It might not be what works for you, and I love having conversations with you guys down in the comment section or on Reddit or wherever about this. What I don't like is that your fit's absolute shit because it's not the one I'm using. I demonstrate that this fit works. Maybe yours is better, we'll talk about that. Treat me like a human being and we'll have a conversation. Now, the first thing I've gone for here is a Mark V Warp Scrambler. Now, see that my Mark V Warp Scrambler here has a range of 12.94, basically 13 kilometers, thanks to the bonuses there, the 15% increase to Warp Scrambler optimal range. Now that means that if I'm up against someone who has a Mark V Warp Scrambler, I can be orbiting at about 12 kilometers, I'll be outside of their range, whilst they are inside of mine. You need to be careful about that, because obviously if you just clip the edge of their warp disruptor and they are far enough to, warp scrambler, and they're quick enough to actually activate that, they will switch off your micro warp drive immediately. So you do need to be careful, but the point I'm going for here is that we're choosing for missiles rather than torpedoes to stay outside of their warp scrambler range. We don't want to get in warp scrambler range. Webs we can deal with quite fine. Warp Scramblers, we cannot, because we'd lose that 500% flight velocity bonus, and that really slows the ship down. I mean, heck, at that point, you're just down to 665.86 meters per second, in this case. Now, the other points I've gone for here are an interruptive stasis Webifier. If I'm going to be orbiting at 12 kilometers, I can also slow them down with my Webifier so that they're not able to close that distance. I can control that distance by being both faster than them and having a Webifier that slows them down. Kind of creates a nice little 13 kilometer barrier between you and your target. And finally, a guide target painter. And I know what a lot of you are thinking, why the heck do you need a target painter on this? Surely there's got to be something better than that. And yes, there kind of can be. This is my question mark slot. I've put a target painter in here because that does help the small missile launcher apply its damage that little bit faster, both to drones and to other small, fast-moving ships. If someone comes up against me with a slasher interceptor, then a target painter is a really useful thing to have, and sorry, it cannot be underestimated how powerful that actually is. You might want to swap it though for something like a guidance disruptor or a tracking disruptor if you're going up against very specific targets. I wouldn't worry about something like, for example, sensor dampeners. Obviously, a secondary web could have its uses here. Nosferatu and Neutralizer, you're going to be out of range most of the time. Obviously, your missiles, you can get close, but then you're kind of risking them having a scrambler. If you get into scrambler range, it is all over. You need to dance outside scram range. The only time you would ever go inside scram range is if you know for a fact that they do not have one. And I cannot stress that enough. That's why you can ultimately even swap out the Warp Scrambler for a Warp Disruptor if you want to play it a little bit safer. I just find it really hard to give up the fact that this is Warp Jammer strength of 3, whereas an equal-sized Warp Disruptor is only Warp strength 1. I can get in really hold them down while staying outside of their Scrambler range. It's kind of a high-risk, high-reward alternative of doing it. But for that other slot there, instead of the Guide Target Painter, as I said, there's no point really with a Nosferatu or a Neutralizer because you're not really going to get to use it. Webs could be useful. You could go for another Scram or a Disruptor or something like that. For me, I like the Target Painter because it just helps out against those smaller, faster targets. Now, I did say that I was going to undock and showcase what the micro warp drive actually does in regards to the Condor Interceptor, so let's do exactly that. If we just quickly jump back to the fitting menu, again you'll remember our standard navigation speed here, if I jump into it, is 665.68, and we have a targeting, we have a signature radius of 29 meters. Obviously it's actually lower than 29, it just rounds up for that particular window. Now, if we activate the micro warp drive, you'll see that woof, off we go, up goes that maximum velocity, all the way up, going super fast speeds all of a sudden. And let's actually now have a look at this in the fitting window. Now, our navigation speed has shot all the way up to 3,790.73 meters per second. Very, very fast moving ship. Notice that the warp preparation time has actually increased as well. This is because of the additional inertia caused by having a micro warp drive active, means it takes a little bit longer to turn and align. If we then go into targeting, however, you'll see that our signature radius has only gone up to 59 meters. Very small ship. That puts us on size with a destroyer, but a destroyer going at 3,791 meters per second. That is insanely fast. Finally as well, since we're out here in space, we currently have a cold DPS here of 212.73. If I were to activate that ballistic control computer and then jump back into the fitting menu, there it is now all the way up at 262.1. Big jump in the DPS, gives you just a little bit of extra power there to punch through things. Now, I recognise as well that I also haven't talked about what rigs I've put on this, so let's do that while we're out here in space and risking getting blown up, because in fairness, I'm kind of now far enough away from station that no one really is going to be able to catch me. In fact, there's a friendly succubus there that even that wouldn't be able to catch up with me at 3,790. So, let's go back into the fitting, have a look at the rigs, and we'll talk about what we have. Now, for the power grid rigs, I've gone for a Warhead Califaction Catalyst 2, 15% flat increase to missile damage bonus, alongside a Bay Loading Accelerator for a 10% reduction to activation time. Obviously, now we are tech level 8, we can start using the Bay Loading Accelerator 3, or the Califaction Catalyst 3, that kind of thing, but you know what? The prices they are on the market for the tiny little bit of extra DPS, to me, right now is not worth it unless you're either stupidly rich, this is the only ship you're using, or those prices come down. The third one I've gone for is a second Warhead Califaction Catalyst 2, just to give myself a little bit extra damage bonus there. Again, here you've kind of got a couple of different options you can go for. You could go for another Bay Loading Accelerator to fire a little bit faster, and I think actually the Bay Loading Accelerator does work out slightly better on the DPS front. Very, very minor improvement. Again, for me, the cost comes into that. I would rather pay 50 million and upgrade my DPS by 5% than pay 150 million to upgrade it by 5.5%. You know, that's kind of the difference we're talking about here. You can also put something here like a rocket fuel cage partition, something that adds a little bit of extra range there to the missiles, or if you're really worried about going up against smaller targets and that guide target painter being a really big thing to you, you could even change that to something like a flare catalyst to make sure that your explosion radius or explosion velocity are better at hitting smaller targets. Now, for the low slots, again, the mechanical rigs, these are kind of... I haven't fully been able to rig this because of the cost of them on the market. Auxiliary Thrusters 2 is a no-brainer. We are in a ship that is all about speed. We want additional speed. Auxiliary Thrusters 2 gives us an additional flight velocity adjustment of 15%. Extra speed, always good. Polycarbon engine housing then reduces the inertia modifier by 10%. That means you're able to maintain a tighter orbit. You can turn, you can relocate a little bit faster. The third one I would go for, if I had any available, would be something like a dynamic fuel valve. We're going to be using the micro warp drive for a lot of the time. We have a capacitor limit, it's not a stable capacitor, so if we're going to be using a micro warp drive for a lot of the time, then we do ultimately want to have something that will reduce the cost of that micro warp drive's activation that little bit further. But that third and final rig can theoretically be anything you want it to. If you're getting involved in gate camping and things like that, then you can even swap that out for something like a targeting relay, or if you want to go up to the pithy C-type, of course, that's where you put your ancillary power grid router as well. Though, in fairness, if you're going for the pithy C-type missiles, I would actually probably lose the polycarbon engine, because you're going for the longer range versions there. You might not really care all that much about how sharp your orbit is. So, long story short there, auxiliary thrusters too, absolutely go for it. Dynamic fuel valve is very much a good option to go for. Then either a polycarbon engine housing or ancillary power grid router if you absolutely have to fit the dead space level missiles on this one. Now, to showcase the Condor Interceptor, I've jumped out into an Angel Small Anomaly 7, just to showcase how this actually works. Now, I know what you're thinking, hang on, didn't you do a Tech 7 anomaly with the Condor 2? Shouldn't the Condor Interceptor, being 4 tech levels higher, be able to do high-level content? And sort of, yes. It can. It struggles a little bit at Tech 8, I won't lie. The Tech 8 anomalies are very difficult nowadays to solo as a frigate, but this does have the decided advantage that ultimately we are able to now avoid gate camps. So if you're in nullsec and you're looking to be farming anomalies, it's much safer for you to be moving an interceptor around rather than just a Condor 2, which is going to get caught up in a gate camp and really struggle. Anyway, with that wave down, you see I lock onto my targets here, and I know for a fact here that my biggest threat are going to be things like the Talwars. The Talwars themselves, those have scrams, and those scrams are a big problem to me. So I've locked onto the Hurricane, I've set that as an orbit target. I want to be orbiting around 15 kilometers away from that. I'm going to drop off some of the other locks here so that I can get the like the bellicose that is doing doing the E-War modules against me, that target painter. But it's important for me that that Talwar, that Gisty Talwar, is taken out quickly, and I can see there's a Talwar assault on the list there as well that I do want to actually get rid of first. Basically, that Talwar that I'm currently targeting, I know can have a warp scrambler, and if it hits me with that warp scrambler, well, that's my micro warp drive off. No micro warp drive means I lose my ability to speed tank, and no speed tanking means suddenly every gun in this fleet can take me out very, very quickly. So, yes, that is primary target numero uno. Keep an eye on having your overview open. Keep an eye on any rats that you know can use scramblers when you're using an interceptor. They are your first priority target. Same here, that I'm trying to get onto that Talwar assault, the second one, because that one also can have a scrambler as well. So I'm just orbiting, I'm making sure to pick my target priority carefully. The fact that there is a bellicose out here as well that is currently hitting me with a Nosferatu, that's not a problem. I'm too far away for that Nosferatu to be a huge issue, but that target painter is a bit of a problem. That is what's causing me to take a bit more damage. So once those Talwar assaults are out of the way, once those have been removed from the equation, that's when I will then move on to the bellicose. Now again, I know what a lot of you are thinking, hang on, if you go out to like the Guristus anomalies, aren't you going to be going up against missile disruptors? Isn't that going to then cause real problems for you in a Condor Interceptor? And yes, of course it is. That's kind of the point, you know? If you need to know to pick your targets. This isn't the kind of game where one ship can do absolutely everything, nor is it designed to. Every ship has its advantages, it has its strengths, and it has its weaknesses. Now, obviously, this means that the Condor Interceptor is excellent if I'm going up against, like, the Angel Cartel, or if I'm down in Amar anomalies that are using tracking disruptors, because, you know what, I don't have turrets, so the tracking disruptors do nothing to me. Whereas if I go out to, like, the Galente anomalies, they have sensor dampeners. Again, not a huge issue, because I'm probably going to have locked on long before those become a thing. And you can see here, I've actually been hit by that scram. I've come a little bit close to that Gisty Talwar, and that has deactivated my micro warp drive. It did slow me right down. I've now been able to kill that quickly and move on. We're now going to take out that bellicose next, so that we can get rid of that target painter. But yeah, obviously, if I'm going up against, like, Gisty, if I'm going up into the Guristus so they're the pithy, if I'm going up against Gurstis pirates, then I do have to accept that I'm going to struggle because they use guidance disruptors. Same that if you're using lasers, you understand that armor tanks are going to be a problem for you. It's just kind of how it works. You can't expect one ship to absolutely be able to do everything. That said, if you find yourself hit with a guidance disruptor, obviously all you need to do is get up right close and take that out ASAP. Obviously, guidance disruptors change the speed, the explosion velocity, the explosion radius, and the total range of any missiles that you're firing. So if you find a ship hitting you with guidance disruptors, you'll want to get in close so that your missiles are able to hit the range penalty. You know, you're within your maximum range once the range penalty has been applied, and you're able to actually take that target out quite quickly. And you can see me orbiting in the background here, how quickly this is orbiting, despite the fact that I'm 11 kilometers away from this thing, very, very quickly. You can see its target painter actually gives a nice little sort of like laser pointer of there I am, and you can see how quickly we're moving across. And in fact, if you wanted to, you could kind of count how long it takes to go from the point time when I cross a line to how long I cross it again. Take 360 degrees, divide it by that time, and that'll give you your angular velocity against this particular ship. So I'm going to set a 10 kilometer range now against the Hurricane here in the distance, so that when this dies, when this bellicose goes down, in literally it should be this volley, possibly the next one, I can move straight on to, there we go, straight on to that Hurricane and start to pull that one down too. And nicely, my ballistic control system has just come off cooldown too. Now I'm orbiting the Hurricane, because obviously the Hurricane's got big guns and it's going to be my primary target, but I am, it's one of my primary concerns. It can do a lot of damage to me, but that Breacher Assault is what I want to take out, so I'm going to target that. I'm going to hit it up with the target painter. I'm 16 kilometers away, so it's too far for the web, but the target painter does make it bigger, and it means that those missiles are going to hit for more damage, which you can see does actually smack that Gisty Preacher out in 2 hits. Very, very nice. That additional damage is not to be laughed at, and I can just literally activate that target painter when I need it. I don't need it here going up against the Scythe, so I don't activate it. I keep my capacitor nice and friendly and keep orbiting. And that's basically how this works in regards to PvE. I just kind of pick the targets, understand your target priority, and off that eats so much capacitor when I activate that computer. Know your target priority. In any situation with a Condor Interceptor, in PvE, your biggest target is going to be anyone who is using either a Warp Scrambler or a Guidance Disruptor. If you can take out the Warp Scrambler first, if you are able to take that one out first, then go on to the Guidance Disruptor. That's the recommended order, because obviously it means that you can have the Micro Warp Drive active ASAP, but if you cannot get close enough to whatever is scrambling you for whatever reason, then yes, you're going to need to take out that Guidance Disruptor first. Other than that, you kind of just go in size order as usual, kind of start with the smaller targets and work your way up to the big ones. In fact, once you start hitting the big ships, later on in this particular wave, I think I actually turned my my Micro Warp Drive off while orbiting the Hurricane, because you just don't need it. The Hurricane is such a big, slow target that the Micro Warp Drive isn't necessary in order to speed tank against it. But basically, that is how the Condor Interceptor works. Now, I did try and find some PvP for this as well. I had no luck whatsoever finding any form of decent target. Like, literally, I found myself going up against just nothing but some really quite scary ships. And it's like, yeah, I could do a section in a video where I just kind of showcase what not to target, but let's be fair, that's not much interesting footage. You want to see, yeah, I would put that in if I'd found something that was kind of a, yes, actually, this is worth going up against as well. Kind of a, this is good to go up against, this is not so good. So anyway, sadly, there is no PvP footage in this video in regards to me using the Condor Interceptor. Maybe I'll find some in future, and we'll come back and sort of tack a little bit on. I'll do another video showcasing the Condor 2 in PvP, but it's basically the same kind of ethic that you're going to be pick your targets, understand your targets. Anything that is smaller than you is a decent enough target, usually because you're pretty fast. Stay away from faction frigates, obviously. Destroyers tend to not be too bad a problem. Just be careful that you don't get warp scrammed. Things like cruisers and battle cruisers, again, can be excellent targets to go up against. You just need to make sure that you are moving fast enough, staying outside of scrambler range, so that you don't lose your Micro Warp Drive, and just basically hold them down whilst you hit them with missiles and hope they don't have guidance disruptors. If they do have guidance disruptors, well, yeah, you're in for a bit of a tough time. Same with target painters. Target painters can really ruin your days, as can long-range webs. Do not go up against a vigilant in this ship. It's not going to end well for you. Anyway, folks, that about wraps up everything that I wanted to say here about the Condor Interceptor. I hope you've enjoyed this. I am sorry that I couldn't showcase any PvP, but there we go. I do hope this has answered some questions that you guys have about it, given you some ideas of what to do and how to use it, and I do hope you enjoy it. These are awesome little ships. They're great fun to use, very powerful in the right hands. Let me know how you get on with them. Let me know which one you're using, if you're using any of the Interceptors already, which one you're looking forward to if you haven't reached tech level 8 yet. Let me know in the comment section down below. Thanks for watching right the way to the end of the video. Happy sailing, and see you in New Eden!